Okay. So here we sit. Let's call it 1942. And the US joined the war a month ago, but they haven't done much other than just start to get ready for war. I think there was like one attack where they tried to attack Tokyo, just symbolically, almost like Britain attacked Berlin during the Blitz, but not much, not much. And although the Russians had stopped Hitler from taking Moscow and St. Petersburg, he didn't fall back and lose all his land, like maybe we saw in the Napoleonic Wars, where Napoleon gets pushed right back after he tries to get in to Moscow. No, they hold their ground in the Ukraine, in Belarus, in Poland, in Eastern Europe. So we said, and Hitler and the Japanese still felt really aggressive. They still thought that they could win. In 1941, they thought they were gonna win, right? If it weren't for the three big mistakes, which was Dunkirk, Pearl Harbor, not taking Pearl Harbor, because I think the story goes that the Japanese could have just like rolled in with their ships and taken Pearl Harbor, and then the Battle of Britain, where they attacked London instead of, and then allowed Britain to rebuild its military. My history professor in college called it the Big Three Mistakes. But yeah, in 1941, they felt like they were winning. 1942, they still felt aggressive. They're like, hey, we got this still. You know, this is us. Well, the big change starts in Africa, which is another part of the war that is so rarely discussed, but is really important. If you look down here, remember the Italians had Libya, the French had Algeria, and the British controlled Egypt. And then in the Middle East, it was controlled by the French and the British still. Okay, and you can see the Russians had pushed down, the Germans had moved all the way down. This is the Caucasus Mountain region. And Moscow, they had been pushed back a little bit. They're still super close to St. Petersburg, or Leningrad at the time. And of course, all of continental Europe is either neutral or they are under the control of the Germans, except for Britain and this little teeny area of southern France that was unoccupied, but there was no military there. The Germans and the Italians had really fortified in Libya, and the idea was we gotta get Egypt, okay, come up into the Middle East, take Turkey, who was neutral. And Turkey probably wouldn't fight anyone, just like Switzerland didn't fight anyone, just like Sweden, and we'll link up here with our troops in Russia, which will then give us what we need. So there are then two battles at the city called El Alamein, and the British are able to stop the German advance through Libya into Egypt. You can see they moved in. Two battles, they stop them both times, and they eventually push back, and eventually they take all of northern Africa back from the Germans and the Italians. This is the first loss that they suffer in the war, is in Africa. Well, I guess they got pushed back a bit in Moscow, but the first time the British and the Americans defeat Hitler is in Africa. And then comes a fateful decision by Hitler, another one of these pivotal turning points of the war. He decides, his generals say, look, if we come down here and take the oil fields in the Caucasus Mountain area, we'll have all the oil we need, and then maybe we hold this empire that we've created. And Hitler says no. He says we got to take Stalingrad. If we take Stalingrad, we'll take all their factories. All the Russian, not all, a large amount of the Russian factories were in Stalingrad. So he says, forget the oil fields in the Caucasus region, I'm taking Stalingrad. And his generals disagree, but Hitler made some mistakes in this war. And he goes after Stalingrad. And this is the single worst fight in world to history. Okay, the Russians also decide they're not giving it up. Period. And this is a picture of Stalingrad, and the whole city was destroyed, basically. But the Russians win. Okay, and I could, it's so weird. Like I could say that, in a college level class where the detail was so much deeper, I could spend an entire day on Stalingrad, right? We probably did. A day on each of these things I'm trying to get done, in 15, 20 minutes. But the Russians hold off. This, everyone's fighting. They circle around. They cut off the German supply lines. 6-month-long battle that drags into the winter. And let's take a look here. This is a picture, but let's look at the map. You guys know I'm a map lover. Here's Stalingrad down here. And in the Germans are taking land. They're taking land. They're taking land. They're taking land. They're looking good. Here's Stalingrad, actually, right here. They're taking all this land, right? And they come in to take Stalingrad, and the Russians are able to come around and cut them off, cut off their supply lines. Okay, and all of a sudden the Germans, and this was the best German infantry unit. All of a sudden the Germans are trapped. And Hitler kills all the Russian prisoners of war. He kills 3 million Russians. We're going to get into this when we do the Holocaust. We're going to find out he kills as many Slavic people as Jewish people. Prisoners of war, not like in battle. That doesn't count. If you count the battle, more Russians died than anyone. In this war, they fought hard. The Russians are tough. They cut off the supply lines from the Germans. It's November now. If you look at the greatest extent, right? So they took all the Germans took all this land by November, and what happens? It freezes. This is why you can't fight Russia, because Russia's frozen tundra. It's too cold. You can't do it. Just don't do it. Don't mess with Russia. And these people, the Germans, are starved out. They're famously eating cats. This once proud, best fighting unit ever German crew were killed off in Stalingrad. The Russians then start pushing back against the Germans. And for the rest of the war, Germany will be playing defense against Russia. Spoiler alert, Russia gets to Berlin first. Russia gets to Hitler first, before the Americans and the Brits. The Americans and the Brits go to the concentration camps. The Russians say, let us get Hitler. And they do. So 42, it still looks like maybe Germany's going to win. They're aggressive. They're trying to take land. 1943, they start playing defense. And for the last 2.5 years of the war, 2 years of the war, they're going to be playing defense, losing land, losing land, losing land. And this is when it happens. Stalingrad, Africa, is when it happens, is when the Germans start to lose. What about the Japanese? Well, in 1942, again, early, the Japanese are still being super aggressive, and they decide that they're going to take Australia. Okay, so here was all the Japanese land. This is Manchuria, Manchukuo. They had the entire coast of China. The Chinese capital was here. The Americans were in China. No one covers us. They're helping the Chinese take back this land from the Japanese. They had all of Southeast Asia. They had Indonesia. They had Malaysia. They had the Philippines, which, oh, by the way, I had this friend growing up, this girl who was Filipina, and she was like, my grandpa was there fighting. And they were treated like, if you ever look at some of the stuff that happened to the Filipinos or the Americans who were prisoners of war there, they look like Holocaust. They were treated horribly by the Japanese. The Japanese were cruel, cruel people during this period. And here's the Coral Sea. They had Solomon Island. We talked about the Solomon Islands. Here's the Coral Sea. And they say, let's take Australia. Okay. And a huge naval battle takes place right here at the Coral Sea in May of 1942. And Japan doesn't get there. Okay, they lose, they get pushed back, they fall back here to the Solomon Islands. And their Offensive war is over. There again now, starting in May of 1942, going to be playing defense. And the first place, here's Hawaii, okay? The first place, oh, by the way, let me just throw this in here. I was trying to throw this in here. College level stuff that I learned. Did you know? Fun fact. There was one rogue Japanese submarine that floated to the west coast of the United States and actually shelled California. Google it. There was a Japanese submarine that made it to the west coast and bombed us from, I think it was Santa Barbara. I think Santa Barbara was bombed by the Japanese. Fun fact, during World War II, as downtown was being built, they did this thing, oh gosh, I forget exactly, where downtown went dark at night. So the Japanese couldn't see our buildings to bomb us at night. I wish I knew more about it. I did a tour once. And all of the downtown buildings built in the 1940s or even before that, where they got transformed so that they could turn dark at night and the Japanese couldn't see it. It's a really interesting story. So Santa Barbara gets shelled. The same rogue Japanese submarine cruises up to Oregon, bombs. They didn't kill anyone in Santa Barbara. They didn't kill anyone in Oregon, but they're bombing like forts on the West Coast. I mean, it wasn't like a blowout. The Japanese had their moments where they were winning. Here's Hawaii, and the first thing we do, the U.S. decides to take Midway. And the Japanese have put a huge naval force right here in Midway. And the U.S. had been building up ships, mostly in California. They were then floating to Pearl Harbor. Again, Hawaii could have been taken. And if Hawaii had been taken, rumor has it that there was very little defense on the West Coast. Could the Japanese have taken Cali? LA? Canoga Park? Woodland Hills? Okay, I stopped. Some say yes, if they had gone right at it. But anyway, so we build up, and by June now, 6 months of weapon building, we attack the Japanese at Midway, and we win. We knock out 4 of their aircraft carriers, which are the biggest, most expensive ships to build. And then it just becomes what's called island hopping, where now the Americans put together 2 groups and they say, you guys go there, and we go here, get these islands back. And each island is a battle. It's a battle royale, okay? Each island is won by the U.S., okay? And slowly but surely, we're going to see the U.S. is going to take all of these islands back from the Japanese. But we'll get there. What we need to know are some of these turning point battles, Battle of the Coral Sea, Midway in the Pacific Theater, and Stalingrad, and really Alamein in Africa as being these turning point battles in the European theater. And 1942 to 1943 is when the tide of the war shifts. 1943, 1944, and 1945 will be nothing but Allied victories, one after another. And in 1945, of course, you're going to find that war ends. Worst war in world history. We'll get there.